In today's video, we will cover the basics of authoring a manuscript with Quarto version 1.5 and Julia. I am using Fedora Workstation Release 40, a Linux operating system. If you are on Windows, you can install the Microsoft Windows subsystem for Linux if you want to follow along. I assume you have Julia version 1.10.3 installed. And I also assume that you have Quarto version 1.5 installed. You also need to install TexLive or some kind of LaTeX distribution on your operating system. You also need to install VS Code for this video. I covered how to install VS Code, TexLive, Windows subsystem for Linux in previous videos. Please see the description for links to those previous videos. I'm on Windows right now, and I'm going to use Windows subsystem for Linux. What I do is search for terminal and open up the terminal app. So terminal app, then I launch Ubuntu. I have a similar setup on my Windows subsystem for Linux as my Fedora Linux distribution, in that I put all my programs in this home folder program folder. And I also have Julia, Python, INFs, and Quarto here. If you need to install Quarto, the instructions on the Quarto website is actually exactly what you would use. Because you're on Windows subsystem for Linux, it's actually a Linux operating system you're doing now, you would actually download this one. And this one would download the latest version, and this command over here would extract the downloaded file to the home folder OPT. In my case, what I did was from squiggly line OPT, I changed that to squiggly line programs, and I followed the rest of the instructions. Just to check if I have Quarto installed properly, I do Quarto check. You see that version 1.540 is installed, that's good. We have LaTeX installed, that's good. I don't have the Python environment activated, that's why I didn't detect Jupyter. The thing I like about Quarto and Julia, and you can use whatever language you want, you don't have to use Julia, is just that the Julia and Quarto does not require additional installation. You see, for R, I have to actually install the knitter package. So I have to launch R, install knitter package, install R Markdown. For Python, I actually have to go set up a virtual environment and install Jupyter. Julia, you just have to have Julia installed, and that's it. Everything would actually be automatically generated for you. We will create a manuscript for the PLOS family of journals in this video. To get the official Quarto template for PLOS journals, go to the home page of Quarto, click on Extensions, then Journal Articles. You should be able to find a list of journals, and we see PLOS over here. Click. You'll be taken to the repository for PLOS templates. I usually have a dedicated Git repository for each manuscript I work on. I'm using GitHub here, and I created a GitHub organization called RW Manuscripts just to help me isolate my manuscript projects from my other repositories. Let's create a new repository. Go to the plus sign here, new repository. We'll call it NMR 2024. Let's make that private for now. Why not add a README? Because you want a README just so you can put instructions on how to reproduce your code for your co-authors. And I will be using Julia for this one. And for a manuscript reproduction folder, I tend to just use the GNU license, but you can use whatever you want here. Now I'm actually going to choose to do the manuscript like that, to choose your organization basically there. Let's create that. Now I would just clone it using SSH. This is the Linux terminal. It is the bash shell. And if you're on Windows subsystem for Linux, you would also have the bash shell once you log into your Linux distribution. So with a bash shell, you can git clone the repository we just saw by doing this. And just copy and paste the link we copied before. Press enter, clones it in. Now we can cd just open up VS Code. Now we're ready to start a template. Usually you will create a QMD file, that's a Quarto source file here, but we won't need to manually create it because we will use a journal template. Quarto journal templates are extensions to the Quarto software, so you need to install the template first as an extension. It's very simple to install it. They have the instruction here. If you run this in your shell, it would install the extension and create an example file. So literally just copy that, go back to your shell, do that, press enter. Yes, you trust them, create a subdirectory, yes. And directly, I just put dot for current directory. And let's open up VS Code. You should now see, if we open up this, you can see the extension is Quarto Journals PLOS. These are basically the style sheets you see from LaTeX. Okay, and you would start from this QMD file here. Before you start, if you're missing this preview button, it means that you did not install the Quarto extension. So if you're missing that preview button over here, it means that you should search for Quarto and the extensions tab on the left. Click on that and you should install it. Once you install that, you go back to your QMD file, then you should be able to see that preview button. So you can click that to render the document, and by default you'll see that its format is in PDF, and if you want number sections, you actually just turn this to be true. Yeah, you see we have a problem here because we're missing a particular style sheet here for LaTeX, because our LaTeX installation was not the full version. If you have this problem, then you're going to have to look up the specific instructions for your operating system. But for Fedora, I know that the instruction would be something like this, sudo dnf, because I had a previous problem with this org ID link. So in this case, we have a last page link that we're missing. Then you just do last page. On Ubuntu, it would be another command. You're going to have to look that up. Once that's installed, we can try the preview button again. It renders. Now, it's safe to actually press the X over here to hide it. But if you want to restart the server, you should actually press the trash can. This will kill the process for this server, this rendering of the document. If you want to, because sometimes things might mess up and you want to restart the rendering process, then you would have to press the trash can over here. So for now, I think things are working fine, so I'm just going to hide it. And I'm actually going to hide this one over here so I have more space to look at my code. I'm actually also going to hide this one by clicking here. It toggles. I have multiple monitors, so I usually separate the preview window with the PDF. I right click, move into new window over here, click, and then I move this to another monitor. You'll see that this is actually a local server, and that is actually this over here. So what you could do alternatively is to use a web browser and just visit that address. It will be the same thing. A very useful tool in VS Code is the outline view. You can get to it from the Explorer tab on the left. Click. By default, it's hidden with the timeline down here. So you just click that, and it should be able to show you all the Markdown headings in this QMD Quarto Markdown file. It also shows code cells, but then this first heading over here, this section, or first level heading, is like this, and you will know this is a subsection in the manuscript, or it's a second level heading. It's got 2 hashes, and this one is the third heading. We can also look very quickly to the next code cell, which is in this color over here. So that would be a table code cell. This one generates a table. Sometimes when you first open a QMD file, you would actually find nothing in the outline section. What you can do is insert a blank line, remove the blank line, basically find an excuse to make a modification to the file. Usually after a few seconds, the outline will be populated. It just means that VS Code needed some time to parse this long document. If that doesn't work, then make sure you save the file. That should prompt VS Code to refresh certain internals. That's my current best guess. I can't exactly reproduce when the outline doesn't show up, but I find that just making a small change to the file and saving it usually forces this to be generated. Another useful feature in the Explore panel here is the timeline. You can actually see all the previous commands you've done in the text editor. For example, Quarto is useful, enter, and then save. You would actually see that right here. File saved. For example, Quarto is useful. So this version is this one. But you can see the 140, like just 1 minute ago. You can see the one from like 18 minutes ago. Well, 18 minutes ago, I did not add that line. One extension that I find is very useful is the bookmark extension. You can find it by going to Bookmarks. That would be this one here. So how that works is that you first have to go to your document, and suppose that you would like to put a marker over here and you'd like to go back to it later. So what you do is you first go to Bookmarks on the left and you say Bookmarks toggle. What you'll see is this little marker comes up. You will see the document file you're in, and this would be the line that you're in. Usually I actually want to have a different label for it, because by default it just takes whatever text is on that line. Useful, for example, and it would tell you the line number. You don't exactly need this extension if you have a piece of paper and you memorize, basically you write on the paper the line number. In VS Code you can do Ctrl+G, at least this is on Linux. If you do Ctrl+G, this pops up this window where you can select the line number. So I can say, line 100. It jumps straight to line 100. Now, Bookmarks is just like an automated way to jot down temporarily what line number you're interested in jumping to. So I find that kind of useful if you have to jump away. Either, for example, I'm working on this sentence over here, but then I'm forced to go back to, say, like a heading to grab something, maybe copy something, and then I forget what line number I was in, but then I go to Bookmarks and go back to here, and then I can continue the edit over there. I can maybe copy and paste some content over. The downside of Bookmarks is if you delete that line, this bookmark actually disappears. So suppose I delete it, but then I change my mind, I undo that, the marker is gone. So you actually won't have any bookmarks left. So if you look over here in the Bookmarks tab, there are no bookmarks. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's why I like to put markers in places where I wouldn't normally delete very often. For example, I would put it over here because I might delete or change certain lines here, or even in the code, right? This is a code block. But I would probably not delete the code block starting point itself. It's okay if you insert lines after it. It's okay if insert lines before it. It would automatically move. It's just that if you delete it, and then you undo it, it's no longer there. This is actually Markdown, this language if you're not familiar with it. And so HTML tags, and this is the link syntax for Markdown. If you do an internet search, there are a lot of guidelines, tutorials on how to write Markdown. The first heading is 1 hashtag. The second level heading is 2 hashtags. And the third level heading is 3 hashtags. I think this would be section, subsection, and subsection. And this would be a table in a Markdown. Now you can also generate tables using code. You can have equations embraced in $signs, just like usual LaTeX. And if you hover your mouse over it and you highlight it, you can actually just see it rendered. For bibliography, you just press the square brackets and you use the @ sign for cross references. This would be a cross reference, for example. But then for bibliography, it would be the tag that you put. So for example, bib1, we can go find the bibliography over here. So the bibliography bib1 would be this guy over here. And if you're using Mendeley or Zotero, these reference manager software, they should be able to export bibtext. You export that as .bibtext.bib, and you put it in the folder here, just like how you would on any other LaTeX projects. Now, this is an equation to create a tag for this, and then you can cross-reference it. You see over here, it's an @ symbol without the square bracket. Remember, if you have a square bracket, that means you're citing. This is a citation. If you hover over it, it will actually tell you what the citation is. But then if there's no square bracket, it means it's a cross-reference. So you're referencing something in a document. In this case, this tag over here is actually this guy. So the hashtag without any space, that indicates that this is some kind of label you generated. And this label is used for the cross-referencing. So for example, this is the introduction section of the manuscript. In the render PDF, we can go look for it. Introduction. So that would be the bibtext reference. But then we also have this equation number reference, right? Nullum equation 1 sapien tolus. And it's basically here. Nullum, some kind of equation number sapien tellus. So if I click on this one, it would actually go to this equation number 1 over here, which is right here. And you would do the same for figures. Sometimes you would use this for simple code. So backticks, this kind of creates like a code block, and it's saying that this is LaTeX. If you have a label, so if you want to cross-reference something enclosed in LaTeX, you actually cannot use the Quarto cross-reference syntax, which is just an @ sign and then your label. For example, over here, we were able to do that because this was not, this block was not specified as LaTeX specifically. It's still considered as Quarto Markdown. Markdown is not actually standardized. Different software and different programming language can have their own flavor of Markdown. So the Quarto Markdown actually extends, I guess, Common Markdown. It extends it to include some of these cross-referencing schemes. But what I'm trying to say over here is that such a syntax would not work because for this figure over here, it's enclosed in a LaTeX block and the label is created. So everything here is actually LaTeX command. It's not Common Mark or it's not Quarto's Markdown. It's LaTeX. Since the label is created in LaTeX, you're actually going to have to reference in code. You have to use a LaTeX command. You can actually directly type the LaTeX cross-reference, which is just /ref open brace and then your label. Personally, I tend to do something like this just to make sure that this is easier to search later on when my document gets large. So this syntax, this cross-reference would actually work, but this one would not work. So let's save the document and let's press the preview button to run it. And let's see what happens over here. Yeah, you see this cross-reference syntax works. So that appeared and this one just didn't work. Now the figure doesn't show up because the PLOS template, the style guide for PLOS is actually, they don't want you to include the figures when you submit. For other journals, you would actually see a figure over here. But for this one, because I know the style guide, you just don't include the figure. That's why they only put the caption here. So this is something to keep in mind. And when you do journals, a lot of times you actually have to use tiny bits of LaTeX in here. And so your cross-reference would have to be also LaTeX. In earlier parts of this video, we were just writing static LaTeX and Markdown. We were not generating any dynamic content using a programming language. In this part of the video, I'll just show a glimpse of what can be done when you pair Quarto with programming language. Quarto supports engines for R, which is with Knitr, Python, which is with Jupyter, Julia, well, natively, or also with Jupyter, as well as observable JS and observable JavaScript. So you can pick one of these 4 languages and create dynamic content. The example I want to give in this video is how to generate a table with values generated from programming code. For that, we need to install a few Julia libraries called Markdown tables and Markdown tables. Julia packages usually have the notation JL at the end. Chances are, if you don't know what a certain package does, all you have to do is just type it, space JL, and search on the internet. So there you go. So then that's the GitHub. You can go through this if you want to learn more about that package. Similarly for tables and Markdown tables. This first line imports or uses the namespace of the PKG, which is the package manager of Julia. The second line creates a virtual environment for this folder. That's why it's a working directory, so it's the dot. This makes sure that we have a virtual environment just for this project, and it doesn't mess around with any other virtual environments on this operating system. The first two lines here in this code cell is defined by backticks with the programming language that you're interested in using. This should definitely match whatever you have in here for engine. The first configuration command I have here for this code cell is echo false. So these are actually Quarto specific commands. This tells the Quarto source code how to deal with the outputs and what to do with this code cell essentially. When you have echo, it specifies whether or not this code block actually appears in the rendered document. In this case, we say false. That means we're hiding the source code here. The output means, do I print anything that is sent to standard I/O, standard input/output from this code block? For example, if you run this code in a Julia session, you will see that when you activate a virtual environment, there will be some printed words to the terminal. So that's what I mean. If you have output true, then those printed words will actually appear in your manuscript. So in this case, I put false because we don't want to see any printed intermediates over here for this code cell. This is just a Julia comment. Starts with a hashtag. So basically, this cell is my customary way of defining what are the dependencies used in this source code, this QMD file. So that's LaTeX, and you have to hand type in manually the entries of this table. But with Julia, this one over here, I can create a cross-reference. You see the cross-reference is label, and then that's a cross-reference. Quarto reserves certain prefixes for cross-referencing labels. If it's TBL, and you have TBL there, they will actually automatically insert table, the word table, according to the style guide as defined by the journal template. So this is very handy, especially if you have to switch journals. You don't have to retype every single label there. The style sheet is supposed to format this for you. And the second one is the table captions. So these are reserved keywords for Quarto's execution, code cell execution commands. So that would be my table caption over here. We have a variable significant figures, and we have a toy variable here that's the value of pi. And these are basically my table entries. So you'll see that I have a table. The first row will have these three entries, basically 1.3, 2, and 3. And then the second row has kappa 1.23, and then NA. So that's kind of like my array, if you will, my 2D array. And then I'm going to wrap that 2D array with headers. First column has no header. Second column is glucose. Third column is isoleucine. And the fourth column is serine. This command would actually print out a markdown version of the table of this 2D array. Since we actually want the output in stdio in standard out for this code cell, I actually set output as is, not false. So that's key. Quarto would be able to figure that out and print the output, the markdown. So basically we dynamically generated a markdown table here. Quarto would be able to pick this up and put it into the manuscript. And furthermore, you can also do something like this, variable capture for variable interpolation or variable parsing, however you want to call it. You use backtick, kind of like your syntax for a variable, But then you have this brace with the programming language that you're using. If there's a variable named myvar, it's going to take the value here and then print it in your document. Let's see how this works. So save, click on preview. The first time you run a Julia program, even in Quarto, it tends to be quite slow because it's compiling. But subsequent times when you run it, if you don't change anything, it will not need to compile again. So it tends to be faster. This is the table over here. So that is the table by LaTeX where I would have to hand type these things over here. For example, cell 2. I'm going to make that Bob row 1, for example. If I do that, press preview, yeah, Bob row 1. So if you do things this way, every single time you run a different data analysis with different parameters, you're going to have to hand type these things in here, unless you have some kind of custom script that writes it output to LaTeX, so on. So you can do it yourself. Or with Quarto, you just change the code over here. If this was a data loading file, you can change it over here and it would automatically generate the Markdown, which appears over here. So notice that we also say echo false. If echo was true, then you would actually see a bunch of code over here. You would see exactly these code over here. But since it's false, it's hidden from the manuscript. Brought to Markdown. That's my var, right? Over here. You can actually grab the results of your code into your manuscript to modify the Markdown. Other programming languages definitely can do this. On the Quarto webpage, there's only R and Python examples. There was no Julia example as of this time when I make the video. So let's see, for example, if you go to computation, you have a Python example and you have an R example. They would all generate tables for you. So if you use R and Python, you can just follow the documentation. It's quite straightforward. But if you use Julia, then you could try to do this. It's worked quite well for me. If you want to learn more about authoring manuscripts in Quarto, head over to Quarto's official website, click on Guide, and on the left-hand side, click on Manuscripts. I would do authoring manuscripts first before you think about publishing, and you can choose which editor you're using. If you want to know more about the execution functions such as echo and output, I recommend going through the guide on computations. So again, go to the guide page and look for computations, and it will be under execution options. This is probably one of the more frequently used commands here. Eval echo output. Eval controls whether or not the code in the code cell runs.